on the global goal on adaptation. Perfect. Thank you so much for recording. Maybe let's just welcome everyone once again because they've just joined in. As I was saying, wishing you good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us for the SWA regional workshops on global goal on adaptation. I'm Anjani Kapoor, Head of Policy at Sanitation and Water for All, and it's wonderful to see so many of you joining today from governments, development partners, civil society, utilities, and research institutions across Asia and Africa. Before we start, a few quick housekeeping points. Please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, organization, and the country you're joining from. If you need interpretation, click the interpretation globe button at the bottom of your screen and choose your language, English or French. And if a question comes to mind at any point during the 90 minutes, drop it in the chat and we'll make sure it reaches our speakers. Now, let me take a moment to explain why we are holding these sessions. Climate change reaches people first through water. It arrives as too much water or too little water, as floods and droughts that damage the very services we are working to protect. That is why our sector can no longer treat climate as someone else's agenda. And that's why adaptation matters to water and sanitation now more than ever. Global frameworks are only as strong as the action countries choose to take with them. Governments have used the Sustainable Development Goals, including a dedicated goal for water and sanitation, to shape their own policies and investment. And the recognition of water and sanitation as human rights helped put people, equity, and accountability at the center of those choices. Think of climate adaptation as part of that same story. The 2015 Paris Agreement set a global goal on adaptation to help countries prepare for climate change, strengthen their resilience, and reduce the harm it causes. Then in December 2023, something just as important happened. At COP28 in Dubai, countries agreed on a framework to turn that goal into action. And for the first time, it includes a dedicated target on climate resilient water and sanitation. Last year at COP13 Belém, they agreed on the indicators to measure progress, including the ones built specifically for our sector. This is the real opportunity. And the task now is to turn that commitment into plans, investment, and action on the ground. As we know, the gap between policy intent and funded delivery is where the lives are lost. Narrowing the gap starts with awareness, because the framework and the role the sector has in delivering it is still new to many. So here's what to expect over the 2 days. Today, we'll focus on understanding the framework itself and what it means for our sector and how adaptation can be built into national water and sanitation plans. We'll hear practical country experiences too. Tomorrow, we move from policy to implementation. We look at the tools, the initiatives, and how climate finance can help turn priorities into results. One last thing, this is a workshop, not a webinar. So you will be invited to take part in exercises and discussions about your own country context. So please be ready to engage and get the most out of these 2 days. So thank you again for being here, for joining us. And I wish you a very productive and energizing 2 days. I hand over to our senior climate advisor, Jose Geste, who will be moderating these sessions over the 2 days. And I'll join you for the closing again. Over to you, Jose, please.
Thank you so much, Anjani. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you. Again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, and thanks for joining. I think we got some inspiring introduction by you, Anjani, reminding us that we have in front of us not just global tools that we have made use, such as the SDG, and the human rights frameworks, but we have a relatively new framework in front of us, and this is what we're going to be discussing, this new framework of global climate resilience with a full dedicated target to climate resilient water and sanitation. Let's try to unpack a little bit what this means and the opportunities it brings us all, including all of you in your respective countries. Now, to set the scene, we have a presentation by Manal Schreibek from IVL. And Manal is also joining us in her capacity as one of the two co-chairs of the SWA Climate Task Team. Manal, over to you to give us this framing introduction presentation.
Thank you, Jose. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this workshop and to provide this introductory presentation. I believe it's quite important before diving deep into the discussion about the framework, the finance, and the policies. It's important basically to remember why this agenda matters. No? So, as mentioned by Anjani, the climate change is already impacting our water and sanitation services in different forms and ways. We often talk about the climate change as environmental challenge, but in practice, it's a water crisis. If we look at the very first slide here, we can see different climate hazards, including drought and changes in rainfall patterns, flood, flash flood, riverine flooding, rising in temperature, sea level rise. All of these climate-related hazards has a specific impact on human water and sanitation infrastructure. For example, looking at the drought impact water availability, increase the competition to access water services. It also impacts household, schools, healthcare facilities to maintain hygiene and sanitation services. At the same time, if we look at other climate hazards like flooding damage infrastructure, water and sanitation, like water network, sanitation, sewer network, as an example, and this overwhelms sanitation and might cause contamination for water resources. These are examples on what could be the impact of the different climate hazards. Looking at the sea level rise, it also impacts the sea level rise also impact the water quality in coastal area, and the rising in temperature, especially in arid region, impact the water demand. We require more water, and that makes stress on the available water resources. These impacts do not affect everyone equally. As I mentioned previously, there are different thematic groups to be exposed. For example, I talked about the climate impact on human, the climate impact on infrastructure, the climate impact on services, ecosystem, including water and sanitation services, but also we don't have equal impact because the vulnerability is different. So for example, if we have good income, we would be able to go buy clean and safe water. If not, some vulnerable group will not be able to do that and might access unsafe sanitation sources. So basically, the climate is affecting us and affect population, including women, girls, children, people living in poverty, and those already facing limited access to services. This is why integrating water and sanitation into climate adaptation planning is not an option. It's very much important if we wish to achieve climate resilience and sustainable development. Next, please. Looking at this slide, The framework that you can see in this slide is basically developed by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This framework has become a foundation for basically defining the climate adaptation planning. It reminds us that the climate impacts are not determined by hazard alone. As you can see in the picture, we do have climate hazards, vulnerability, and exposure. And basically, the climate risk emerges from interaction between these different elements. Like how, we do have the hazard. The hazards are the climate events themselves. We just explained about some examples of the climate hazards like flood, drought, and sea level rise as an example. The exposure refers to people, infrastructure, services, ecosystem. Vulnerability reflect on how prepared communities and institutions, including financial capacities, institutional capacities, to cope with those hazards. For water and sanitation system and services, this means that adaptation is not only responding to the climate hazards, it's equally about reducing the vulnerability of our system and building, ensure that we do have the capacities to basically respond and be better prepared to address the impact of the climate conditions. This understanding of the climate risk help us basically to identify what kind of action needed. And this brings us to the next slide. Please, if we look at this slide, basically what kind of climate actions are needed? We are talking about two different categories here about mitigation and adaptation. There are two different type of action, I would say, as you can see in this slide. The adaptation, basically, it's mainly reducing, addressing. The mitigation is basically to address the causes, while adaptation is basically to address the consequences of the climate change. As you can see here, some examples, looking at the examples on adaptation, for example, building a climate resilient infrastructure or have water and sanitation planning. It's kind of examples on adaptation to climate change. While mitigation, we look on we look for reducing greenhouse gases emissions. For example, wastewater methane reduction or recovery, resource recovery, and the circular economy. Because this workshop focuses on the global goal on adaptation, our primary focus in the next 2 days will be on adaptation. We need to understand how countries can strengthen water and sanitation resilience, integrate this priority into their climate priorities, and translate them into finance and implementation. If adaptation is our objective, then the next question becomes what exactly a climate resilient water and sanitation look like? Next, please. If we look at this slide, maybe to give a bit a background of this process, like the development of the climate, the definition of the climate resilient WASH services. At SWA, we have spent the last 2 years discussing and working with the government, sector partners, climate experts, utilities, civil societies, organizations, to basically answer a fundamental question. What do we actually mean by climate resilient sanitation services? This process led by SWA launched at COP30, and the latest version of the definition and response framework of the climate resilient services was published and disseminated. The definition, it's available online, accessible online, but the definition basically explained that climate resilient water sanitation services, it's basically anticipate, response, cope with, recover from adaptation, and translate them, adapt to or transform based on climate resilient events and trends, all while striving to achieve and maintain universal equal access to safely managed services. And importantly, to mention that resilient is not only about infrastructure, it's equally about institution, services, communities, ecosystem, and financing the system, working together to ensure services remain reliable under changing of climate conditions. We will return to the discussion of, we will come to the details of this definition tomorrow, but during tomorrow's session. For now, the key message is that climate resilience is no longer as an abstract concept. It provides practical basis for planning, implementation, financing adaptation in the water and sanitation sector. The challenge, however, is basically is that climate adaptation and water sanitation planning often taking place in parallel. So bridging these two processes, I mean the climate planning and the water and sanitation strategies, bridging these two processes together might be challenging. That's why we do have processes such as the Global Goal of Adaptation, the National Adaptation Plan becomes particularly very important. And that is the focus of our first day, basically helping to bridge water sanitation and the climate policies. Next slide, please. Looking at the different type of climate policies, we are talking about National Adaptation Plan, NDCs, the sector climate policies, the water and sanitation policies. If we know what a climate resilient water and sanitation services looks like, the question how countries can make this a reality. The answer lies between policies integration, as I mentioned earlier. Climate adaptation process priorities are often developed through the climate processes, while water sanitation priorities are often developed as part of the sector planning. Too often, this conservation happens separately. We know why, might mainly due to the leading institutions on a national level. I think Jose in the next sessions will mention about Madrid Compact, which was a kind of successful model of elevating water sanitation to the higher level kind of leadership. Yet achieving climate resilient water and sanitation services require this agenda to come together in policies, planning, implementation, and finances. I don't want to take too much time. I think I'm already done with the minutes allocated for my session, but hope that the first day we will explore how countries can better integrate water and sanitation into adaptation processes, and how a global framework can support these efforts. Thank you so much. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you very much, Manar. That was very comprehensive and very useful to help us frame the discussion actually for today, but also for tomorrow. And as we have seen through your presentation, you have explained to us why are we focusing on adaptation, our discussion in this workshop on adaptation, while mitigation is the reduction of greenhouse gases is an important approach, but you have explained to us why is it important that today and tomorrow we focus on adaptation. I think you have broken a little bit the mysteries and demystified, climate resilient what? We have a definition, and you have explained that it took more than 2 years to get into consensus and agreement as to how do we define what is climate resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene services, which is a tremendous advancement. And tomorrow we will go, as you have said, Manal, into much more detail into what is this definition about and an implementation framework, which is also very useful at the national and subnational level. So now is my turn to go through the next segment of our workshop today. For those of you that may have joined later, my name is Jose Gesti. I'm a Senior Climate Advisor at the Secretariat of our partnership, Sanitation and Water for All. I'm moderating the session today, and now I'm also in charge of, as I said, of this next segment. So what I wanted to tell you is, before we start with the slides, is that throughout this workshop, what we're going to be discussing is climate resilient water and sanitation systems, obviously. But before we go into more technical discussions, I think it's important that we all spend, as part of this workshop, a few minutes looking at the broader climate policy landscape. So many of the decisions that shape national adaptation priorities, planning processes, and access to climate finance are indeed influenced by international climate agreements and processes. So we want to bring to your attention and demystify a little bit some of those so that you get more familiar. The objective now then is to provide some practical overview, hopefully you find it practical, of what is this global architecture, and then we will focus on the most important recent development, which is how the global goal on adaptation has moved forward steadily over the last couple of years. If I can have the next slide, please. Let's then start with the foundation. Let's start by explaining so that we are all familiar with what is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We typically abbreviate this as the UNFCCC or UNFCCC. So this convention, the Climate Change Convention, is an international treaty that provides the basis for all global cooperation on climate change. This convention was agreed in Rio de Janeiro back in 1992 and today has essentially universal membership. Most of you will have heard and may be familiar with what we refer normally again with the acronym COP, the COP meetings. The COP meetings are the conferences of the parties, the countries that are part of this agreement, right? As we say now, mostly universal. The COPs are the main decision-making meetings under the convention. And the important thing to remember is that adaptation, finance, mitigation, transparency, and implementation, they are all these topics, they are all discussed and negotiated within this climate change framework. So when we talk about climate adaptation policies, as we have already seen, national adaptation plans, climate finance, etc., they all sit within this broader framework architecture, right? The next slide, please. But adaptation was not always as prominent as we see it today. In the very early years of the Climate Change Convention, back in 1992, most of the attention was focused on mitigation, meaning, as we've seen, the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions. But as climate change are becoming more visible, countries are increasingly recognizing that adaptation is not optional, right? So a few milestones are worth remembering now. Like in 2001, COP7 already established the Less Developed Countries Fund, one of the key financial mechanisms for the convention, and also an expert group that is called the Less Developed Countries Expert Group. It has an interesting abbreviation. It's abbreviated as the LEG, L-E-G. In 2010, moving forward, but you see that almost a decade later, the Cancun Adaptation Framework elevated adaptation as one of the major areas of work under the convention and introduced the National Adaptation Plan process. It's only 5 years later that we see another big milestone for adaptation, which is the Paris Agreement in 2015, which formally established the global goal on adaptation. Now, if we move to COP28 in Dubai that Anjani has referred to in December 2023, this is the major milestone that we will focus on today with the adoption of the framework for global climate resilience, right? So as you can see, this has been a long journey of more than 20 years to get where we are now. The next slide. Within these milestones, let me perhaps focus a little bit on the Paris Agreement. Most of you may associate the Paris Agreement with mitigation and emissions reductions. And of course, this is a major part of the Paris Agreement. But let's emphasize that the Paris Agreement rests on three pillars, which is the first one, mitigation, the second one, adaptation, and the third is the means of implementation, meaning finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. So for today's discussions, the key point is that adaptation is not secondary, and that's what we wanted to emphasize. Because of the relevance of our discussion today, I will also say that indeed the Paris Agreement has Article 7 of the Paris Agreement established the so-called global call on adaptation, recognizing that all countries need to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability to climate change. Next slide, please. So how do countries translate these global commitments into actions? There is not just one climate policy document at the national level. Countries, as we are referring already in the previous interventions, use a number of complementary instruments. We have, in your countries, the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. We have the National Adaptation Plans, or NAPs. Have other instruments such as national communications. And of course, climate financing proposals, which are submitted to funds such as the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, or the Global Environmental Facility, are also key instruments. For those of us working in water and sanitation, understanding these instruments is really important because they increasingly influence planning priorities and investment decisions. Next slide. So let's quickly look at the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are the main national commitments under the Paris Agreement. Many of you may still think sometimes as the nationally determined contributions as a mitigation document only, but that's no longer the case. So today, NDCs typically and most likely include both mitigation priorities and adaptation priorities. Countries are expected to update the NDCs every 5 years, and indeed, we are now currently in the third cycle of revision of NDCs. Most countries have already submitted what is referred to as the NDC 3.0. For us, in water and sanitation sector, NDCs provide an important opportunity to raise political visibility and ensure that climate resilient water and sanitation priorities are recognized at the national level. And we will hear some stories today, actually from Rwanda, on how the country has worked on that front. So the next slide, please. So if we quickly look at an analysis that it was conducted recently by the United Nations Economic Commission in Europe, we see that the encouraging message is that water and sanitation are increasingly recognized as a climate priority. However, they still remain not very visible. As you can see on the slide, a significant proportion of nationally determined contributions either do not set priorities related to water supply or sanitation at all, or only refer in a limited way. So while there has been some progress, there is still a lot of work to be done to strengthen the integration of water and sanitation when your countries are going through the process of revising your NDC. The next slide, please. If we turn now to the National Adaptation Plans, the NAPs, NAPs are really the main national process for identifying, prioritizing, and implementing adaptation actions. If NDCs tell us what countries want to achieve, NAPs often provide much more detail on how adaptation is going to actually happen in your countries. Today, we have more than 75 national adaptation plans submitted to the convention, to the climate convention, by developing countries. And several countries have also gone the further milestone of developing sector-specific adaptation plans. And today we will hear from Uganda, who has developed the very first ever at the global level national adaptation plan for water, sanitation, and hygiene. An important recent development is also the release of the updated 2025 NAP technical guidelines. You can see the cover on the slide. These guidelines now reflect on the global goal on adaptation and help you in countries align national planning processes with the new global climate resilience framework. The next slide, please. So here, similarly to the analysis of the NDCs, we see the analysis for national adaptation plans, where the picture looks much more encouraging than before, right? Compared to NDCs, national adaptation plans tend to provide much stronger coverage of water supply, sanitation, and related adaptation priorities. For us, when we've seen the results of this analysis, this is not a surprise because national adaptation plans are indeed specifically designed to assess climate risk and identify adaptation priorities, as Manal has explained through this risk matrix of understanding hazards, vulnerability, and exposure. So what this is telling us is that national adaptation plans may often be one of the strongest entry points for integrating climate resilience, water supply, sanitation planning. Today, the participatory exercise will take us into this, so we will ask you actually later on in this workshop, in this session today, to look at your national adaptation plan and respond a few questions. Next slide, please. So far we've looked at the main climate policy instruments, and now I would like to focus on the global goal on adaptation itself, probably because it's the most significant recent development in the adaptation agenda. Next slide, please. The global goal on adaptation, that we abbreviate as the GGA, so that you are familiar with the acronym, was established, as we've seen, under the Paris Agreement in 2015. We've seen it before, and there is a specific article that sets such a global goal on adaptation. It's Article 7 of the Paris Agreement. However, since the Paris Agreement in 2015 and this article on the global goal on adaptation, there was not a lot of understanding on how to achieve such a global goal, right? Or how could that look like? So the major milestone comes again December 2023, COP28 in Dubai, where countries adopted by consensus what is referred to as the Global Climate Resilience Framework. It takes the name of the United Arab Emirates as it's where this agreement was achieved in Dubai. This framework provides common adaptation targets and creates a shared reference point now for tracking adaptation progress at the global level. The next slide, please. The next one, please. The framework includes 7 thematic targets that you can see on the screen. You will see that it's not because we want to put it first, but the first target of this framework is actually on water and sanitation. You see that all the thematic areas include food and agriculture, health, ecosystems, infrastructure, livelihoods and poverty, and also cultural heritage, which makes the 7th thematic target. But for us, obviously, the most important target is the first one of this global framework. It's important that we read carefully the narrative of the framework, of this target, because the water and sanitation global target calls for: 1, reducing climate-induced water scarcity, strengthening resilience to water-related hazards, but then it calls towards advancing climate-resilient water supply, climate-resilient sanitation, and access to safe drinking water for all. So this is probably, let me emphasize this is probably the strongest recognition of water and sanitation ever within a global climate agreement. Next slide, please. The framework also recognizes the adaptation planning process. So countries, you in your countries need to assess risk. Manuel has emphasized that. Then plan for adaptation, then implement, and finally monitor and evaluate and learn. So that is why the framework includes these 4 policy targets beyond the 7 thematic targets that we've seen before. In many ways, these 4 targets that we have now on the screen, the 4 policy targets, mirror the adaptation cycle that in many of your countries are already following through the national adaptation planning processes. So the global goal on adaptation is not creating a complete new system. It rather provides a common framework that helps us organize and strengthen existing adaptation efforts. Next slide, please. It's also important that you understand that following the adoption of the framework in December 2023, countries have worked on developing indicators for the targets that we have just seen, indicators that can help us monitor and measure progress, right? This is a process that from our side in SWA, we have closely been part of and closely supported with some of our partners as well. Just a few months ago, at COP30 in Belém in November last year, the Belém, what it's now referred to as the Belém adaptation indicators, were agreed. This is a number of 59 indicators against the global framework, and 9 of the 59 indicators refer specifically to water and sanitation. So here you can see the first group of 4 indicators that have a focus on water resources and system resilience, including areas such as water stress, water use efficiency, resilience of water and sanitation infrastructure, and adaptation planning at the basin level. The next slide, please. So those were 4 of the 9 water and sanitation indicators. This is the second group of 5 water and sanitation indicators, which focus much more directly on people. Here you see the proportion of people with access to climate-resilient drinking water, also with access to climate-resilient sanitation, as well as measures to extend these basic services to support exposed and vulnerable populations, and a specific indicator on water quality, and also to support communities affected by climate-related hazards. All these indicators are particularly important for our discussions today and tomorrow because they move beyond infrastructure and look at the resilience from the perspective of people and services. Let me conclude now with the next slide with 3 key takeaway messages here. The first one is climate adaptation is increasingly being guided through national climate policy processes. The second point is that water and sanitation need to be systematically reflected in nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans. And the third point is that the global goal on adaptation is providing us a unique opportunity to strengthen planning, monitoring, as we've seen, accountability, and ultimately, as we will discuss tomorrow, investments in climate-resilient water and sanitation systems. Thank you very much. And that was the end of my intervention. Next slide, please. Because now we move into a very dynamic segment of our workshop today, in which we are going to have some country insights. And right away, I'm going to invite Martha Naigaga, who is joining us. She's Senior Environmental Health Officer at the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda, who is going to, as I have already indicated before, she's going to walk us through the very interesting process to develop the first ever water, sanitation, and hygiene National Adaptation Plan that it was just launched a couple of weeks ago. Martha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jose, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who has managed to join this call. My name is Martha Naigaga. I work as a Senior Environmental Health Officer in the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda, and I am glad and really honored to present Uganda's experience in development of our WASH sector National Adaptation Plan. Before I continue, I will request that you permit me to switch off this video after I have greeted all of you so that I ensure stability of the network.
Perfectly fine, Martha.
Next slide, please. Yes, thank you so much. I want to applaud Uganda once again for developing the first ever WASH NAP. But as a sector in Uganda, we must acknowledge those that went ahead of us. We were not the first sectoral plan that was developed. Agriculture and health went a bit ahead of us, but still, we are happy to note that we were the first ever in the world to develop the WASH NAP. We all know that climate change is a water crisis. Indeed, that's the best way that people see climate change when they think about it. It is evidenced and manifested best through water, whether it is too much water, too little water, or too dirty water. In many cases, when people interact with this, it is so related and it can make climate change very visible to ordinary people. The WASH sector in Uganda is one of those sectors that was identified as a high risk and a vulnerable sector according to a national risk and vulnerability assessment that was conducted for the country. But again, even when we went ahead to develop our national determined contributions in 2022, the WASH sector still featured prominently as a priority sector for adaptation. And I must say, even as we go into the NDC3, which we are almost finalizing, the WASH sector has continued to present prominently. And as a country, whereas we care about mitigation and the things to do with reducing greenhouse gas emissions, our main response to climate change, or our main priority, is largely adaptation, because we are already dealing with issues that have been caused by climate change in the sense of floods and drought and landslides, to mention but a few, especially for the WASH sector. So next slide, please. So our preparatory process for the WASH NAP has been a long journey spanning over about 2 years. We started on this process about 2023 towards the end, 2024. Yes, and it has been a long journey, and I want to highlight a few of the steps that we took. But I must say that it was a highly consultative, a highly involving, a highly iterative process that we undertook, involving a multitude of stakeholders at different levels. So the first step we did was to identify the kind of stakeholders that we want to engage in this regard at the different levels. And we also went ahead to know, why are we engaging these stakeholders? The stakeholders spanned from both national and non-state actors, rather state and non-state actors at national level and at subnational level. We reached out to civil society organizations, UN agencies, government entities, and as it is already, the WASH sector is already a multi-stakeholder kind of undertaking that involves many actors, including private sector. But when we were undertaking this WASH NAP, We reached out to all those stakeholders, including communities, and highlighted why. Why is it that we want to involve these stakeholders? What is their role? What can they bring to the table? We went ahead to also undertake literature review and other analysis that we could find. And then we went into formation of a task force that was coming from different walks of life, from government, from civil society, from private sector, but of course it was government-led by the Ministry of Water and Environment. We also undertook a climate risk and vulnerability assessment in which we identified that the most prominent 3 hazards that affect the wash sector include flooding, drought, and landslides. So for the wash sector, those are very critical in Uganda, and of course, our actions thereafter that we identified in terms of priority actions and costed, and IM&E framework and priority interventions that we developed thereafter were informed by that climate risk and vulnerability assessment. We gladly launched our WashNAP in March this year, and we have been able to submit it officially to the UNFCCC, and it has been recorded, and it went down history that indeed we were the first to be able to develop our WashNAP. This process has been highly interactive, highly consultative. We consulted our regional structures as a ministry. We have people that sit at the region, but also because in Uganda we run a system of decentralization. In the districts, that is where the real action happens. The level of service delivery is actually at the district level. So those were also consulted in addition to other stakeholders in the community, in the civil society organization, but also learning from our neighbors and other stakeholders, as you can see if you happen to read our WashNAP. Next slide, please. So in that WashNAP, we had a vision of an enhanced climate resilient Uganda, where all people have equitable and sustainable access to safe and reliable wash services, and a goal of strengthening adaptive capacity and improving resilience for the wash sector in Uganda. But we borrowed from the kind of holistic approach that the SWA emphasizes. The SWA, the Sanitation and Water for All, emphasizes that we do not look, when we think about climate resilience, we do not look only at the infrastructure, but we consider the 5 components, including the enabling environment, the ecosystem, the infrastructure itself, the service providers, and also the communities. So our priority actions were structured under those thematic areas to be able to have a holistic outlook, as I highlight in the next slide. So in our NAP, we identified actions and key priorities that would be implemented to address the pillar of enabling environment for climate action, and we have a set of activities there, including but not limited to policies and standards and guidelines, issues to do with financing and resource mobilization, institutional capacity, embracing ICT and smart technologies, as well as coordination and information management. Regarding the ecosystem, we thought about undertaking aquifer recharge and watershed protection, catchment-based water resources management. In Uganda, we have a catchment-based management system of how we manage our water resources, and we have very many catchments under which we organize different stakeholders to contribute to the integrated water resources management. We thought about water storage and water resources infrastructure, as well as ecosystem restoration and conservation. Regarding the wash infrastructure, of course, we wanted to focus on climate-proof designs that are able to withstand the effects of droughts and floods, and water supply systems that would be able to withstand those effects. We thought about resilient sanitation facilities and systems, of course, including measures to address the operation and maintenance. Regarding the service providers or the systems that actually deliver the services, we thought to undertake capacity building for both public and private service providers, taking into account emergency preparedness and response, but also improved service monitoring and management. Lastly, we thought about communities and how they can be made more resilient in terms of climate change, but also responding to their WASH needs. So we thought about climate resilient hygiene and sanitation practices, early warning systems, water conservation, and also using local WASH markets and supply chains. Our WASHNAP is meant to span for about 5 years, from 2026 to 2030, coincides with the end of the SDGs, but we need approximately 276 million US dollars to be able to implement all the activities that were identified and documented in the WASHNAP. Go on, please. So as key lessons or key considerations that we undertook during this development process, we noted country ownership, that whereas the money to do this WASHNAP was provided by UNICEF, thank you UNICEF, Uganda, the process was led by the government and owned by government. The Ministry of Water took lead of this process and ensured that the WASHNAP is aligned to government priorities and policies and the overall development agenda. We embraced multi-stakeholder participation and inclusion because we understand that WASH in nature is a multi-stakeholder kind of intervention. So we borrowed on those principles and undertook a highly consultative process that involved several activities of stakeholder engagement. Evidence-based planning, when we were doing this WASHNAP, yes, it featured prominently. We conducted several assessments. As I highlighted earlier, we did vulnerability and risk assessment, but also we made use of existing data in the WASH sector, in the climate sector, in the environment sector, and it informed our development process. We also thought about integration and mainstreaming and ensured that the adaptation process or the adaptation interventions are inbuilt into WASH plans and investments, focusing on strengthening existing systems rather than creating parallel structures specifically for the implementation of the WASHNAP. Ecosystem-based adaptation, yes, we thought about this and considered it that we wanted our WASHNAP and the activities and interventions we proposed therein to think or to have a focus that is broad-based and largely reliant on nature-based solutions, because we recognize that resilient WASH is only possible in a healthy ecosystem. So aspects of IWRM, integrated water resources management, featured prominently, and even in our interventions, nature-based solutions featured prominently. Flexibility and adaptive implementation. We take note that this is a living document that we think can be revised, that can be made to speak to the existing or emerging issues that come along, and we want to be able to embrace adaptive implementation even as we go into the implementation phase of this WASHNAP. Cross-sectoral learning and building on existing efforts. We were able to recognize and borrowed from the efforts of those that had gone ahead of us. As I said earlier, other sectors like the agriculture sector, the health sector had gone ahead of us, but we recognized that part of what they do relates to our work as WASH. So we embrace cross-sectoral learning and building on existing efforts. Largely, I want to say it has been a very rich process where different stakeholders have been involved, and the country has walked the journey, and we're at a point where we must implement this WASHNAP. And indeed, the actions that have featured in the WASHNAP have also contributed to the development of the NDC3, which is almost being finalized. And as a country, we have been able to integrate WASH in climate and also the climate actions in our WASH agenda. Thank you very much. That's all I have to share.
Thank you so much, Martha. This is impressive. Congratulations to you and Uganda for leading this way. We already see in the chat that there are questions that we will try to address separately in terms of the journey that you have described. And countries are already getting inspired as to how could they replicate this initiative, right? We are really happy that this global workshop, regional workshop, Martha, serves also as a kind of regional broader launch to the launching of your WhatsApp just again a couple of weeks ago. We are lucky to have you. We thank you, Martha, for all these insights. And again, we already see that it's a sparkling attention and countries want to know more. We will facilitate some of this exchange after the workshop. Thanks again. Now, if we have the next slide, please. I would like to go into the next segment where we're going to have a little bit of dynamic interaction with Bruce Uwokunda, who is Chief of Party of the project that you see on the screen for Water for People. And while with Martha, we've been discussing more on the NDC, on the National Adaptation Plan, she has already built the connection as well with the NDC and the revisions, right, that we have seen before. Actually, to you, Bruce, we have limited time, but the first question and the first thing we wanted to invite you to describe a little bit, actually, this process, right, of what was the initial situation of the NDC in Rwanda, what was your diagnosis, and what did you do, right, to try to address this? If you can be brief, Bruce, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. Yeah, thank you for the good question. And as it has been explained from even your introduction, I think most of the countries in regard to NDC and the National Adaptation Plans, before COP28 in Dubai, water and sanitation was not really reflected. It was the same case in Rwanda. So we were normally focusing on water resource and adaptation measures in terms of catchment protection and river protections or water bodies protections. There was no tangible water and sanitation activities. So it was the case for Rwanda. It was mainly having livelihood protections. In some cases, you might have maybe one project that includes a human settlement and where you have maybe water and sanitation included, but water and sanitation was not the core interventions under the National Adaptation Plans or the NDC itself. So I would say the Dubai COP28 with the statement of including water and sanitation was really like the triggering point or the starting point, which I think opened the eyes to everyone that water and sanitation should really be part of all our climate resilience interventions. So it is from that statement and that COP28 that Rwanda took the initiative to update the NDC 3.0, which has been finished and submitted, and I'm happy to share with you the experience. So that's how it was before.
Thank you, Bruce, for sharing with us and also for emphasizing this so that we get all the other participants in the same understanding as well, right? Like for you, the way that you have witnessed this global agreement, you have quickly made use of it to influence processes at the national level, right? So this is a clear cascading effect from global quickly into national, and you can give testimony of that. Now, we understand that so your diagnosis is that water sanitation was not well reflected in the previous versions of the NDC in Rwanda. Now, you use this global tool as a leverage, right, to bring the attention of the government and other colleagues. So if you can tell us briefly as well, what is the process? How do you engage? What are your counterparts? How do you bring to the attention of the pen holders, right, of the revision of the NDC? How do you engage with them? And at the end, briefly as well, whether you are satisfied with this engagement and where you manage in this revision, the third revision of the NDC in Rwanda, if you are now more happy with the results and you can see priorities established.
Yeah, thank you for the question. NDCs are country-led, so it was not a Water for People NDC. We all know that NDCs are government-led, and NGOs or development partners can only support or facilitate the process. Water for People as a global NGO with the mandate of where no one in the world suffers from the lack of water and sanitation services, we normally go through a system strengthening approach. So we build the capacity of government, we build the capacity of the actors. So it is from that angles that even within our implementation, we even changed our approach by using a climate resilient approach, different from the traditional approach of, for example, infrastructure development. I'm sure most of NGOs around the world, water and sanitation NGOs, and maybe even government support, we are only focusing on infrastructure, laying pipes, constructing water treatment plants, constructing without paying attention on the climate impact. And of course, can give examples that you construct the water supply systems and the next day it is flooded or a landslide have washed away everything. So it is from that angle that Water for People decided we are losing investment. We've implemented 5 years ago a water supply systems or a construction, but now it is no longer in use because of it is flooded or it is no longer operational due to climate impact. So from that angle, changing our internal thinking and our internal approach, we approached the government, telling them that we are always working together to make investment on water and sanitation. However, we are all losing because the infrastructure we provide is government asset, but also to provide to the community the service. If the infrastructure are no longer providing the service, we are all losing. So we need to change the approach. So we organized various workshops, various discussions, and after COP28, now we had like argument to tell the government that now this is the right time to make the change, because now we're even supported. Before, it was even difficult because when we're even, for example, submitting a proposal or a climate resilient proposal, most of the time they are rejected because they did not have supporting document or references. And therefore, for example, our national utility will face problems to even submit a proposal to repair a treatment plant that has been flooded or a water and sanitation infrastructure that have been washed away. So with the COP28, we now ask the government, how can we support you? There's a process to update the NDC. So we triggered the discussions and we provoked the discussions, and we even facilitated by supporting financially some of the process, like organizing workshops, the discussions, so that the consultant now will capture the key like activities, because in the previous NDC, water and sanitation actors were not involved, but this time we're actively involved. And if you allow, I even maybe share my screen to show you that now the NDC 3.0 in Rwanda has a water and sanitation statement. So that's maybe one of the key outcome, that is now it is reflected in the document.
Maybe Bruce, sorry to interrupt. I will ask you, maybe in the interest of time, I know that you have documented this case study, and if it could be possible, what I could ask you instead is to paste the link to the case study so that colleagues can further view, because I think we will need to move on with the next segment of the workshop today. But what we are hearing, I think, is pretty important, right? Your diagnosis of an NDC with not enough integration of water and sanitation, what we're hearing is that you have made use of the global resilience target for water and sanitation as a strong tool to advocate for, to discuss with the government. And based on that, you have built your trust to be able of influence or be part of the revision of an NDC in a country. I think those are powerful statements and a powerful case study that certainly will help our partners in other countries to understand how to contribute meaningful, from a water and sanitation perspective into the revision of the NDCs. We have stated that these are not static documents, they are revised in cycles of 5 years. So Bruce,
Thank
that
you.
was
I've
really,
shared the link in the chat.
please
People
do.
can see the NDC 3.0. It have the statement, it have the key activities, and maybe the next step is to now go ahead and develop an app like Uganda did, like my colleague Martha, how they did it. I know government has an internal document to monitor NDC implementation, but it's not really an app like the way it's not that the one from Uganda, but it is an internal like monitoring document that each organization will have. So maybe the next step is to go forward and produce a national adaptation plans with all indicators, and of course taking into consideration the COP30 indicators recommended in Belém.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bruce. That was really, really interesting. Thanks for making the time to join us and to share this experience with colleagues in the in region. This is covering mostly Africa and Asia, and we hope that partners are getting inspiration from you. Thanks also for pasting in the chat box the further links. And also, if you want to share your details in case that other colleagues want to reach out to you for further information. We really appreciate it, Bruce. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jose. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We will move now to the next segment. Unfortunately, our colleague from Mali has not been able to join. So we are moving into what we have promised. This is a workshop. We want you to have time also to reflect and to work on something that we think it will be important for you to take away after this workshop. I'm going to explain briefly what the exercise that we are proposing that you focus now for the next 15 minutes is going to be about. We are going to share a Google form with you in the chat box, or it's already there. It's a bilingual form. If we can have the next slide, please. You will see there when you go into the Google form that in the first step, we're asking you we're providing you with a hyperlink of this website that you see on the screen. This is the website from the convention where all the national adaptation plans that have been formulated and submitted are hosted. There you will see there are 76 countries with national adaptation plans. So what we are asking you, first step is to go there, and the hyperlink is provided in the form, to locate your country national adaptation plan. Again, there are 76, so you may be joining us this workshop from a country that has no formulated yet the national adaptation plan. That's already an important information, as that will mean that your country is now working on the formulation and the submission, and you can make use of everything we have discussed to try to be part of that process. So in the case that your country has no national adaptation plan, we have provided you the hyperlink to go to the repository of all the NDCs, right? In the case that your country has no NAP, we ask you to then use this second link to go to the national determined contributions. We can have the next slide. Once you have located your country NAP, we have the example on the screen of Bangladesh. What we are asking you to do quickly is, you will see this is a long document. Don't get intimidated by it. That's the main takeaway from this exercise. Please don't get intimidated by a very long document. What we are asking you is to locate the table of contents. Within the table of contents, Obviously, the table of content will be different for the different countries' plans, right? But locate, because you will have a section in the index of it, where you will see the adaptation priorities. And we are asking you to scan quickly to see if you see water resources or water sanitation priorities there. That will be 1-2 pages maximum. So first, go to your country map, locate the table of contents, scan quickly to see where the priorities are established, and see then whether you identified water and sanitation priorities. So the scanning exercise is for the priorities section of your National Adaptation Plan. The survey, the form, the Google form that we have shared, as we say, bilingual, will prompt you into answering a couple of questions. And yeah, within the next few minutes, we ask you please to do this exercise. I will be here, we will be here. If you have any questions, you can paste them in the chat and we can try to do our best to answer them. But we'll let you work now. This is a workshop. We'll let you work for a few minutes. We'll be sending you a couple of reminders as the time that is left so that you can submit your form, right? There are 4 questions, sorry, in the survey. Some are multiple choice, or just one question is asking you to elaborate. So please, we ask you to start this work. And again, we will be paying attention to the chat box, and we will be sending you a couple of reminders on the time. But again, it's time for you to work. We have on the screen how the survey looks like. And here you will see how to fill in this form. First, we require your email, then your constituency. If you can scroll down, and here is where you have the links, right, to the NAP Central and the NDC registry, where you will be able to find your NAP. Then we have the questions that we are asking you to fill in. Where is the country that you are reviewing, whether there is an app, etc. So we're asking you to do this. We're just quickly seeing how the Google form looks like. And again, I'm pasting in the chat box as well. Where can you find the 76 National Adaptation Plans submitted so far? I hope at this time you have already located your National Adaptation Plan, or if there is no National Adaptation Plan still submitted, you have located your country NDC, and you are already working to identify in the table of contents where adaptation priorities lie on that document, so that you could quickly look at those and identify whether water and sanitation priorities are established in that section. We also want to let you know that everyone will get an email copy of the responses today in the form that you will submit, and they should keep that for tomorrow's exercise, as we will continue building on. We are showing the results as they go live. We understand it takes a few minutes to locate your NAP, to locate within the index where the priorities lie on your country NAP. And then obviously it takes a couple of minutes to look at them quickly, scan them to see if you see water and sanitation priorities established. We're going to keep showing the results as your colleagues have the time to navigate quickly, scan quickly your document, and answer the questions in the survey. We will allow a couple of minutes more for you to go through the priorities. Again, these are long documents. All we want to do with this exercise is that you lose the fear of navigating a long document with this tutorial on how to quickly scan that. empowering you with understanding of whether water and sanitation priorities exist in your National Adaptation Plan is important, as we have seen with the country presentations before. So we want you to be equipped with this understanding. Where can you quickly find your National Adaptation Plan? How can you quickly scan a very long document to identify if water and sanitation are among the priorities established in your countries for adaptation? We think that even if it's just a few minutes, this is a powerful exercise for you to get acquainted with all this knowledge. We will give you a couple of more minutes to continue working on it. We see the responses increasing. We are giving 2 more minutes, colleagues, for you to continue with this exercise. We really appreciate your engagement with this activity. We see the results moving, which means that more of you are being able to answer the questions. Just 2 more minutes. You will see that tomorrow's exercise will build on this and your findings today, as we will move into climate financing, and your responses today will be very important to build on for tomorrow's exercise. We're going to wait till the clock hits the 25 minutes past the hour to then close the exercise, but there is still a little bit of time for you to continue. We encourage you to do so. Just a few more seconds, and then we are asking you to quickly go through the questions and press the submit in your forms, as we will very soon start to conclude. Perfect. We have hit the 25 minutes past the hour mark. Maybe, Lucia, I will ask you to go from, well, we see the question one. Well, we see that we have 32 responses so far. Please wrap up the exercise as soon as you can. We see the constituencies that we got. We see research and learning, but we also see private sector. We have a good representation of civil society as well as all the other constituencies. If we go further down to see quickly the results, Lucia, we can see a lot of countries. We got a lot of responses from a lot of countries. The question two, which was the document that you have reviewed, we have a lot of, almost 3/4 have responded that they do have a national adaptation plan, and otherwise there is no national adaptation plan yet, and they've been looking at the NDC. The question three, which is the presence of water and sanitation adaptation priorities, for which, if we can scroll down a little bit more, we got yes, clearly included, as well as partially included. So this is encouraging, it's good news. So we have a high percentage of inclusion, as we have already seen in the global analysis that I showed to you before. Question four, we have asked you to paste here some of the things that you found in your national adaptation plans or NDCs in terms of priorities. We will be looking at those after the workshops, also to analyze what you have pasted there, what are the priorities in your countries, so that we can organize them. And finally, I think, well, that will be, maybe you can scroll. The focus on services that we were asking in question 5, we see that strongly addressed 37%, partially addressed 25%, mentioned only indirectly 16%. It's moving as we go forward. Thanks for all the responses. We had an optional question that we got also a lot of responses about gender inclusion, which 37% of you have said that you find it's adequately addressed, partially addressed 28%. So that was the exercise. Again, we ask you to press, when you're ready, press submit, and you will get an email response with your responses, and that will be important to have handy tomorrow. But now I hand over to our head of policy, Anjani, who started the webinar and will close it now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jose. And as you rightly said, before we close for today, let me pull the threads together from day one. It has been a really informative session and very engaging as well, at least from where I was sitting. And I feel others felt it too in the room. So we began the workshop with a simple truth. Climate change is a water crisis. It reaches people as too much water, too little water, or water too dirty to use, a human rights consideration as well here. And it is already disrupting the services people depend on. We then looked at the wider picture, how the world organizes its response to climate change, and how adaptation has moved to the center of it. The key message is that we now have a framework built for this moment. The global goal on adaptation gives water and sanitation a dedicated target, as we heard, and since Belém, the indicators to track the progress. But a framework only delivers if it shows up in the national plans. As we heard today, water and sanitation are still only thinly reflected in many country headline climate commitments. Though they came through more strongly in the National Adaptation Plans, we were also looking at the exercise that he did. That makes most of these plans, like the National Adaptation Plans, the strongest entry point for all of us to engage, influence, and advocate for water and sanitation. And it matters because what is not written into climate planning tends to struggle to get attention for finance later on. And this is not theory, we saw it being done. Uganda has launched a dedicated wash adaptation plan. And in Rwanda, COP28 was the trigger for making water and sanitation part of its climate resilience agenda, with NDC 3.0 now being finalized. Then in the participatory exercise, many of you looked at your own national plans and where water and sanitation sit within them. I hope that was a useful starting point for the discussion tomorrow as well. We will email you the results, as Jose said, so please keep them handy for tomorrow's exercise. Tomorrow, we move from policy discussion that we've had today to implementation. We will look at how this agenda gets delivered on the ground and how climate finance can help turn priorities into results. Thank you to all our speakers and all of you for your engagement today. I look forward to continuing this discussion tomorrow with all of you, so please do join us. Thank you so much.